Welcome back to BTR Boxing Podcast Network. I'm joined by my good friend Chris, Vice Chairman of BIBA, also a big friend, fan and compatriot of this particular show. And the reason we've brought a little extra episode out this week is because of boxing news. And of course, there's always something that happens in the boxing world. Sometimes it's worthy of an extra little 20-30 minute podcast, and this news certainly is worthy of that said podcast, because Conor Benn has been cleared by the WBC to fight again. They have accepted the explanation that has been presented to them, that he had too many chicken eggs, and that was the reason why he had clofamine in his system, because according to the science, if you ingest too many of these said eggs, then you will actually potentially have clofamine in your system, which is a can of worms, a huge can of worms that has now just been opened, and many jokes, many memes going around social media about Conor Benn. But ultimately, the seriousness of this particular incident occurring and the ruling that the WBC have just given really changes the sport for the worse, doesn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a strange decision in the first instance. One of the things which we've got to sit back and think about is, what message does this send not out to boxing, but to sportsmen in general and professional athletes? We've got a governing body here in the WBC who Conor Benn has really had limited involvement with during his professional career, other than signing up for the WBC Clean programme, which sounds like a joke now. But all these title fights which he's had have been with the WBA, who've actually kept themselves very, very quiet over the whole situation. And the sole focus of Conor Benn didn't seem to be clearing his name with the British Boxing Board of Control, or even UCAD, or VADA, who actually did the original test. It really seemed to be, I want to still maintain my ranking with the WBC. And it just, for me, it's just a very, very weird move by Conor Benn. When you sit back and read all the information on the tests, the failed test, the WBC statement, it doesn't clear him. And that's one thing which we should say right from the off here. He has not been cleared by the WBC. They have basically said that there's no conclusive evidence to be found that he intentionally ingested it. But when you look at the drug governing bodies, and as I say, VADA, the UCAD, and even the British Boxing Board of Control's own rulebook, it's up to the athlete what they ingest. It is down to them. The responsibility lies with them. So, to actually turn around and say, I didn't knowingly ingest it, so you can't, fine me, or you can't ban me, it just doesn't work for me. And I just think it's a very, very dangerous message to send out. And the fact that the WBC and the British Boxing Board of Control work so closely together, it also feels like a slap in the face for the British Boxing Board of Control, as they are still doing their own investigation.
What do you think this compares to in previous cases then? So, for example, I had this conversation off air with someone that maybe isn't so much of a great boxing fan, but certainly someone who pays a vested interest within it. And their sort of questions to me was, well, what about Tyson Fury and his nandrolone issue? And what about Canelo and his issue? And what about all these other issues? Like, these guys have been allowed to box again, so why is it any different with Conor Benn? And why would you say it is any different with Conor Benn in this instance?
I suppose with the other two, we've got to kind of say there was a line drawn under them. The Fury saga took years to actually get to a conclusion, and he served almost retrospectively a ban. Canelo was just a ridiculous statement of affairs as well, because, with Canelo, he tested positive for clenbuterol in 2018, served a 6-month ban, then came and fought exactly when he would have fought anyway. So, there was no, real punishment for either man, either Fury or Canelo. For Benn, the situation is different. He failed 2 tests. He failed his first test in July, then his second test on the 1st of September. And this was kept quiet And it wasn't until October, really, that it all blew up. The British Boxing Board of Control knew about it for a number of days. And when we look back at the actual timeline and the period of events, the whole thing's been mishandled. From the fact that the both tests were positive, the fact that we believe Chris Eubank's team were actually advised of it around about the 4th of October and were still willing to go on with the fight. The only reason it looked like the fight was pulled when we look back on the timeline is that the Mail Online was going to leak the story, and then everybody started to take action. But even when the failed drug test was made public, Eddie Hearn and Matchroom still disgracefully, in my opinion, tried to put the match on, tried to push the British Boxing Board of Control to actually sanction this contest. And fair play to Robert Smith and the British Boxing Board of Control, they ultimately withdrew it. But the contest could have still went ahead if someone had stepped in and actually sanctioned it. Because the one thing which we've also still got to remember in this whole mess, and it is an absolute mess, Conor Benn is not suspended. His license, he actually handed his license back to the British Boxing Board of Control after a hearing on another matter, and were either led to believe that it expired, or he handed it back in and said that he no longer wanted to be licensed from them. And that's actually stopping their investigation, because they are saying that Conor Benn isn't actually working with them and that they've not seen any of the detail that the WBC have had. So for me, the whole thing has just been a mess, and it's been mishandled at every factor, and I really don't know what he's going to gain by being re-ranked in the WBC, unless his plan is to go and get a license with someone like the Dubai Boxing Commission or the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and then fight in America or in the Middle East.
Really good explanation from yourself there, Chris, for those maybe that have not fully gone through the detail of what's really gone down here. And you touched on a few points which have been mentioned before. I mean, me and Johnston have talked about this before in previous episodes, but I suppose having you on, it's a different conversation. Your knowledge is better than ours when it comes down to this stuff, so we kind of lean on you a little bit to sort of break this stuff down, and you've done a great job of really explaining it for those that maybe have only heard certain parts of what's actually gone on. I think the biggest issue that's happened for me with this whole thing is the way things were trying to be manoeuvred so that this knowledge didn't get out there. And like you said, if it wasn't for the Daily Mail basically leaking this information, we would have been none the wiser about it. And this would have just happened. That fight with Eubank would have just happened, and the course of history would have been slightly different. But it got leaked, and I think that's the worst part, is the fact that they weren't going to divulge that information. They were going to allow that fight to happen. The fact that Eddie Hearn was going to allow that fight to happen really throws shades at him as a promoter, because it just shows that he is willing to promote a fighter and a fight regardless of the situation surrounding any issues with drug testing. And the amount of interviews where people have pulled them up and put compilations of them together on Twitter is quite hilarious, where someone will ask him about a drugs cheat or drugs testing, and he'll go, yeah, they should be banned right out. And there was one person that actually put a compilation of interviews where he said stuff like this in the past together, and it was quite embarrassing for him. I mean, he probably doesn't care whatsoever, but it's embarrassing really for his reputation that he was going to allow this to happen, and now he's sort of distancing himself away from things, and he's trying to sort of stay on the fence and stay neutral in this whole saga. Of course he's going to promote Conor Benn again, absolutely. The money's going to be there. Conor Benn's talking the big talk at the moment, and, as of yesterday, I was seeing exchanges between him, Conor Benn, and Errol Spence Jr., out of all people in the world. Errol Spence Jr., one of the best welterweights, if not the best welterweight in the world, one of the pound-for-pound top 10 fighters, and yet Conor Benn really hasn't got himself up yet. He hasn't cleared his name, so to speak, and yet it looks like he's vying for a fight with Errol Spence, and I'm just thinking to myself, really, Conor? Are you really doing this right now? Is this really the appropriate time for you to be engaging with someone at this level when you haven't even fought a guy in the top 5 really in the welterweight division, yet you're campaigning against arguably the best guy in it? And it just all seems so strange and surreal that he's just kind of carrying on now. He's just carrying on. He's letting everybody else do the work behind the scenes. And it's like, look, I'm going to fight again very shortly, and it's going to happen regardless of what these outcomes are. It just doesn't really leave a good taste in the mouth of a boxing fan. And how can you sort of move forward following this guy's career now? You know, regardless of what the outcome is, it's going to be tainted. His career is completely tainted as a result. So no matter what he does from here on out, whether he goes on to win some sort of world title or recognised title, this mark's going to always be there. This asterisk is always going to be there against his name, and he's never truly going to be able to recover from this. And I think you look at the Fury cases and the Canelo cases, and you know you've made some sort of valid points about, you know, okay, you know, there was bans essentially in retrospect, and then you've got Canelo with his 6 months ban. It wasn't right. None of us really agreed with it, but essentially he did serve some ban per se, the pair of them in some capacity. Whereas at the moment, it's looking more and more likely that Conor Benn might even not even get banned for this, and that justification around the whole consumption of chicken eggs is going to be the justification for it, because they're saying they can scientifically prove that he's not knowingly ingested a super amount of clofamine, which has then shown up in the traces of his urine sample when he's had his drugs test. I genuinely can't fathom how this can play out the way it seems to be playing out. It just doesn't seem right.
No, it doesn't. But, you know, let's look at what actually clofamine is. You know, it's an anti-estrogenic. You know, so what does that do? It elevates your testosterone levels. It's quite convenient that that's what he ingested by mistake. You know, and looking at how many eggs you would need to get those levels, 34 eggs a week is what you would probably need to get these trace levels, which they're claiming were in the test. So that's a hell of a lot of eggs. And one of the things which has come to light over the last few days, as you say, there's a lot of internet journalists or a lot of little sleuths going around. There's been a fantastic expose of an article which was written in GQ magazine earlier on in 2022, where Conor Benn actually talks about his diet. And it's fish, it's prawns. He talks about the fact that he's almost pescatarian, almost vegetarian in some respects, but he was almost vegetarian. Then he needed to get some calories back in, so he moved over to eating fish. He then says, I enjoy an occasional fried egg. You know, now that was in the middle of the testing period when that article came out. And the fact that he never mentioned that he was down in 34 eggs a week is quite suspect. The whole thing, you know, has just been mishandled, and it's really beginning to irritate me. You know, one of the things which I was getting very wound up with yesterday was the headlines of the shall we call them the main media, the main press, who were saying Conor Benn has been cleared. Conor Benn has not been cleared. You know, there is an application where the British Boxing Board of Control and UCAD are still looking at it. They don't have the information to make an assessment because Conor Benn won't engage with them. My whole fear with this process is that if, with him not having a license any longer by the British Boxing Board of Control, if he doesn't engage with them, if he doesn't give them any information, it's just almost going to be brushed under the carpet and forgot about, because they can't take any action against him because he's not a license holder any longer. So really what Conor Benn's got to do is stop saying, I've been cleared, I'm innocent, I'm going to fight again, and clear up the mess with the British Boxing Board of Control. If he gets a 2-year ban, fine, he gets a 2-year ban, then come back and start your career. You're young enough, but don't try and fool the public and kid us that you're clean, that you didn't knowingly ingest this substance when it was in your body. You know, the whole thing for me, it's just ignorance by everybody involved.
Doesn't Tyson Fury fight under a different license and not the British Boxing Board of Control? Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, right. Tyson Fury fights under Nevada State Athletic Boxing Commission license.
So is there a chance that he's going to completely not bother with this whole, I'll clear my name with the British Boxing Board of Control, and instead I'll go down that route? Because I think there's a very strong possibility that's the route he's going to end up going down.
Yeah, I do as well. And if you think about the Errol Spence, why are we now beginning to see Errol Spence getting targeted? Oh, he holds a WBC welterweight title. So there we go. Here's a fight which Conor Benn could actually get. could get it in America or he could get it in Saudi. We know Eddie's got links over in Abu Dhabi also. He's got links with the Dubai Boxing Commission. So all of a sudden, there's doors opening up all over the world for Conor Benn. But again, in his defence, if we're being balanced, we should say he's never been suspended as yet. So he's well within his rights to go and get a licence, whether or not we think it's morally correct or not. And that is another factor which we've got to bring into play. Is it morally correct to do this when there's an ongoing investigation into you? Some people just don't care. And I think that is what you've said about Eddie Hearn. He just doesn't care. And I agree with you on this. They'll be looking, how can we patch up the lost revenue to max room to Conor Benn from the failed Chris Eubank fight? And they do that by Errol Spence, pay-per-view, for a world title, whether Conor Benn's ready for it or not.
That's a really good shout, and it seems like that could be a possibility. And Conor Benn isn't ready for it. I mean, that's a different conversation for a different day. But the reality is, the business behind it makes sense for them to try and push for that, because that event was huge losses really for them. It was a huge pay-per-view fight. It was really hyped up. It was very. We were very excited about it, regardless of what we thought about the weight differences within the fight. People would tune into it anyway. So for us, it was a moment where Eddie Hearn's lost that money on that show, and how is he going to recoup that? Well, he's going to get a different help Ben get a different license somewhere else with his links that he has, and get him fighting in America and have him fighting in cards in America. It wouldn't surprise me if he pops up on the undercard of a huge fight coming up. It really wouldn't surprise me at all, and that'd be the way to do it. Thinking from that perspective, if you're in their position, and regardless of what they think, or what has happened and hasn't happened, if they're going to try and relaunch his career, where better to do it than in America? I mean, that's the land of the drugs cheats in America, isn't it? Let's be honest. How many American fighters over the years have been caught there and kind of been slapped on the wrist and carried on? I mean, Jarrell Miller is one of them, for God's sake. I mean, he's fighting again, and it won't be long before he ends up getting put in the picture again for a potential big fight. It really wouldn't surprise me. So, you go there and you certainly expect that something like this could happen. A fight on an Errol Spence undercard, for example, wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility with a future fight with these two. But ultimately for us, it's just, as I sort of pardon the pun, I said it was an excuse. I said that in the title of this episode, because it's an excuse, talking about eggs being the problem. And, the Domino's picture that was put out yesterday on social media was quite hilarious, talking about the Conor Benn pizza, and then he actually had the audacity to reply and just say, actually, I like Pizza Hut instead, which, I thought was quite funny, to be fair. But the fact that other people and even companies are making light of this just kind of shows you that there's not many people that believe in him and believe the story at the moment. No boxing fan out there, I've not seen one boxing fan say that this guy, he's clear, 100%. I've not seen one person supporting him, not one. Every single one. I think this is the only time you'll see boxing Twitter unified in an opinion. There's not one on there that I've seen recently, Chris, that says otherwise than that he's a cheat and he needs to clear his name, and that's the only way people are going to accept it. But coming out and using this as the excuse, the reason for this, and then the WBC kind of, okay, they're not clearing it, as I said at the start of the episode, per se, on what you've said, Chris, but what they are doing is they're kind of saying, well, there isn't any evidence that he's knowingly and intentionally ingested clofamine in some capacity, so we're happy with that, and we're happy to just let him fight again. It's no problem. You can fight under the WBC. You can come into our rankings. It wouldn't surprise me if they haven't already put him in the rankings in some capacity. I haven't checked it prior to doing this, but it wouldn't surprise me if he just pops up in the next week in the WBC top 15 rankings. And then what happens next? Does the British Boxing Board of Control just go off what the WBC are doing because of their strong affiliations with each other? I mean, does that happen next, or do you think the board will stay their stance on it?
I think the board have got to stay and keep firm on this. The board, let's not forget, the board have already fined and banned numerous fighters over the years for taking substances which they claimed they didn't know about. There's been some substances. There was Dillian White had an issue. We've had Kid Galahad had an issue. If you remember Kid Galahad, when he got caught for having substance in his system, he actually said it was his brother had spiked his sports drink because he was jealous of him. Now that was his defence. Now, there we go. There's Kid Galahad, didn't knowingly ingest a substance. Dillian White took an over-the-counter substance, I believe, where he didn't actually realise that there was a substance on the banned list on it. So again, he didn't knowingly ingest a substance. Both were subsequently banned. So, the British Boxing Board of Control has a track record of actually not necessarily taking into consideration what others do, making their own rulings and making it stick and making it firm. So I think here, regardless of how he got it into his system, as I said before, UCAD have got a written statement out which basically says the athlete is solely responsible for how something appears in their system and how it gets into their system regardless. So, with that, I think if they actually conclude their investigation, and I do think there's a big question mark over or not whether they will get to even conclude it, there will be a ban or there will be something coming out for Ben. Because the one thing which the WBC hasn't stated is it wasn't in his system. They've said, yeah, it was in his system, so it's a banned substance, so why are we actually, still in the dark about what's happening with the British Boxing Board of Control and VADA? But what was also quite illuminating with the WBC's statement was they said that they were going to go to the World Anti-Doping Agency and actually liaise with them about potential false positives and concerns which could come from a similar situation. So not only have they backed Conor Benn, they've actually taken it a step further and said, we will now defend further athletes in the future because this could happen to them again. So we'll liaise with WADA and see if we can put a stop to this. When have you ever seen a statement like that? It's, the statement was damaging in itself.
It's crazy. The whole thing is crazy, and I honestly can't fathom why there has not been a conclusion to this as yet. I mean, what are we, 4 or 5 months into this now? Around about 5 months into this whole thing, and you'd expect now that some sort of ruling decision would have been made by now, and it just seems to be dragging on. And I think it feels like the longer it drags on, the more people are kind of going to forget about it, or that's what people hope is going to happen. People hope that people are going to forget about it, but I don't think we will. I mean, this is a situation that continues to rage on, and Conor doesn't help himself because he puts things out here now and again on social media that just strikes up the debate once again, and he's just leaving himself subjected to people on social media giving him that level of abuse, and obviously some of it's rightly justified if it's it's really sort of evidence-based information, but what a lot of people are doing is just sort of forming their opinions, and as I said earlier, it just damages his career either way, regardless of whether some sort of magical evidence comes out of the woodwork and it actually proves him to be innocent, and then people are still not going to forget it, really. I don't think people are going to be able to either way forget about this happening in his career, and I think this is what's going to badly affect him in the future. I don't think it'll affect his opportunities because the guy's going to sell. The guy's going to sell tickets either way, and I've always maintained this from the start of this whole thing happening, is that regardless of what happens, whether we agree with it or disagree with it, he will still end up selling tickets, he will still end up in fights, Eddie Hearn will still get him fights unless he decides to wash his hands of him completely, which I can't see happening because there'll be some type of contract in place still where Eddie Hearn's going to want to recoup any losses that he's had with Conor Benn, and he's certainly going to want to get him in fights, and he'll be happy to throw him in fights where he's probably out of his depth and not ready for them, because for Hearn it'll make the money. And it's just so negative, the sort of conversation we have to have about this sport sometimes, and this is one of them really, where we just can't fathom, every other week something's happening, every other week some bit of news comes out, and it just leaves us all in a little bit of uproar. And last week it was Lee Wood, and was it a controversial stoppage, and as the days passed over we actually saw more information come out there from Lee Wood himself even admitting that he was gone. So at least with that, you kind of, after a few days, there was a few people that had to eat a bit of humble pie, really, those that were screaming and shouting about it. But this is a universal sort of opinion on Conor Benn, where everyone's just going to say, you know what, you're a cheat. There's no getting out of it. You're a cheat, no matter what you say. Even if the chicken egg excuse is accepted and he manages to resume his boxing career in one way, shape or form, there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to look at it again and go, do you know what? I'll support this guy again and I want to see him get to the top. It's going to be really difficult for any normal boxing fan to sit there and go, do you know what? I can support this guy's career. I can forget about this happening. And you're always going to have that asterisk next to him. And yes, we could say the same. We could say we're contradictory at times because we support Fury. We watch the Fury fights. We see what he does. We talk about him. We support Canelo in some ways. We watch his fights. Well, yeah, these have had drug tests as well. So are we contradicts for doing that? I suppose in some ways maybe we are. But in this instance, I think it's really goddamn clear cut that there is an issue. And the fact that everybody's trying to hide the issue is a huge problem. And it just leads people to believe, including myself, that this is just so rife in the sport. And it's just because it's come out more publicly as to why Conor Benn's now being made the scapegoat and it isn't anybody else.
Yeah, I think with this one as well, why we're outraged by it is when Conor Benn came out, everybody, from a certain era loved his father, myself included. Nigel Benn was my hero when I was growing up, and I was one of the world's biggest Nigel Benn fans, still am to this day. So when his son turned over, everybody was wishing him well. We loved hearing the chimes of Big Ben coming again when he made his ring walk, his Ready or Not music. We all bought into it. And then he started to get progressively better. And we started to buy into the narrative. Could this kid actually turn himself from someone who didn't look very, very great when he started, and he looked very poor and lacking technique? And, then he had that massive war with Cedric Peno where both eyes were closed. And, he himself actually said, is this the sport that I want to be in? But then he started to almost reinvent himself. He became very muscular. He became fast. He started to get great head movement. And we all started to buy into it. Then he started to get knockouts, Chris Van Heerden, Samuel Vargas, Chris Algieri. And we all thought, you know what? He's actually putting the work in. He's first in the gym, he's last in. And we all bought into it, a bit like we all bought into Lance Armstrong coming back from cancer in a way. And then we get this massive shock. A few days before he's due to fight Chris Eubank, he's tested positive. And everybody in the boxing world just felt completely deflated because we bought into this guy. And now we felt that we were understanding it a little bit better. But when you think of the Chris Eubank situation as well, what if it is true that Conor Benn took this substance? It's for testosterone. So what does testosterone do? It helps your powers of recovery, it helps your strength, helps your endurance, and builds muscles. So he was going to put weight on. And we just seen what happened with Chris Eubank Jr. and Liam Smith, who's not a known puncher. What if that bout had went ahead and we had a dirty fighter in there, allegedly? What if Chris Eubank had got knocked out by Conor Benn and badly damaged after the test results had been made public? The whole thing is just a mess. I can't say, how disappointed I am in everybody involved, because no one has handled this correctly. And to come out now and say, I'm clear, wrong thing again. You should be turning around and saying, one, I've managed to get a decision by the WBC, and that's going to go in my favour because it now puts an element of doubt as to whatever happens elsewhere. My next focus is getting cleared properly by the British Boxing Board of Control, or taking whatever punishment they give me, and then I'll resume my career. That's what you should be saying now, not saying, I'm going to fight you, Errol Spence, and I'm going to wipe the floor with you because you've been drinking too much and you've been involved in a car accident. Utter ridiculous. Don't go from one distasteful situation to another.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Chris. And I think on that note, it's a good place to call time on this little short episode that we've done this week on the Conor Benn situation. And of course, it is going to cause debate. People are going to have their own opinions about what we're saying. And I'd like to think everybody sort of supports that, what we're saying in this instance, because I do feel everybody feels the same in many ways, and maybe they have different justifications and reasons to why they feel this way, but I certainly believe that most people are in unison when it comes to what we think at this moment in time. And if you've got different opinions, or you think there's anything else you want to throw into the mix that we haven't already said, then just let us know at BTL Boxing Pod on Twitter, or you can find us across Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You can find us on YouTube if you're listening to us on there and doing it that way. Drop a comment below in the box and just let us know what you think about it all. It rages on. The debate certainly rages on, and within the next few weeks and months we may get more information. We may hear more things about it, and it may lead to more conversations like this. And I'm sure all of us will welcome it. We just want an outcome. That's it. We just want an outcome at the end of it all. So, Chris, big thanks for coming on last minute, doing a little short episode with us, and I hope everybody else, you've enjoyed it and enjoyed what we've had to say and the opinions we've got and everything that, Chris, you've brought to the table for this episode. So big thanks to you and to everybody else listening. And as always, thank you very much for supporting us. Please make sure you are liking and sharing and retweeting and doing all the necessaries. Jake Paul and Tommy Fury is also happening, so if you're listening to this and you haven't heard that preview yet, please make sure you do listen to that. People have got mixed opinions on what they think is going to happen, but I'm seeing a lot of people voting for Paul this weekend, so really interested to see how this fight goes down. Please make sure you do all the necessaries, and thank you for listening to this episode of BTR Boxing Podcast.
The dream is made real! Ricky Hatton rocks the world!